Now to housing, and will today's protest in London against David Cameron's housing bill do anything to solve the housing crisis in Britain? That there is a crisis is admitted by every political party, but after the latest round of local elections, could there be any shift in the critical issue of private property versus public property? With me is the Hawford Mackinder Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford and member of the London Fairness Commission, Professor Danny Dorling. Danny, thanks for coming back on the show. So, as I said, every party agrees there is a crisis. What's the scale of it right now?
It's not been as bad as it is now for many, many decades. You could go back to the crisis after the war when so much housing had been bombed and find a worse crisis, but compared to that, we can't find a situation where so many families are crowding into housing, often sharing housing in London, where homelessness is rising and where most people are spending so much of their income just to have a bed.
Well, David Cameron's big contribution has been the Help to Buy initiative. Sadiq Khan appeared to be saying he was against it, or at least realising that your criticisms in the past. On the other hand, we called City Hall and there's been no official announcement. What's your take on how serious he is about Help to Buy? And how bad is Help to Buy? I
think Sadiq should have had his little envelope ready. If he knew he was going to win, or very likely to win, he should have a policy that he'd thought about during all those weeks of campaigning to say this is what he thinks. Help to Buy is part of the government's plan to inflate housing prices as high as they can possibly get to. So Help to Buy is that we, the taxpayers, will underwrite up to 40% of a mortgage only in London, not in the rest of the country.
Nothing to do with trying to help ordinary Londoners get their feet on the property ladder.
Ordinary Londoners have got no chance of a Help to Buy mortgage. This is property going for £500, £550, £595,000. You still have to get a mortgage for just over half of that yourself, and a deposit, which most people cannot save. But then we will then lend the rest and risk the rest. There are people in Scotland paying their taxes that will be used to help the son or daughter of some incredibly affluent Member of Parliament get on the housing ladder. This is Help to Buy is help for the children of the upper middle classes to keep the London market up, to make prices as high as they can be, because the Conservatives, although they publicly say there is a housing crisis, privately they say housing's never been better, look at how much it's worth. The higher the price, the more a market is successful.
So it's a conspiracy?
It's not a conspiracy. They simply realised if they were to tell the public that they see high rents and high prices as a sign of success, they wouldn't do very well electorally. But they always see the rich part of a city as a successful part. They see prices being high, showing you that your good is valuable. So London prices being high to Conservatives tells them that London is a success, and if you can't afford to live here, you should leave. And if you've managed to invest in London and do well out of it, well, somehow that's down to your economic prowess. The problem with that is that every single housing market in history that's risen like this has at some point crashed.
In fairness to Sadiq Khan, the big issue was anti-Semitism, not housing. If you look at the media, another reflection of the class of people that care about housing and those that don't?
It wasn't really anti-Semitism. What it was an attempt, as it became evident that Zach wasn't going to win, the people who decided what Zach was going to say decided to go for dog whistle politics and try to use racism. But the overall rise of the Labour Party, the support for Labour nationally, winning 3 other mayors, seeing the increase, the Jeremy Corbyn effect helped Sadiq win London. And the Conservatives tried dog whistle politics as a last-minute attempt to beat him. And what's really interesting is that London will not tolerate racism anymore. That's one thing we've learned from this election.
Because you've written recently of the fact that when it comes to housing as an issue, it is immigration that is usually name-checked.
Yes.
Ian Duncan Smith using it for various purposes in the past 24 hours. It's not immigration then, the reason London is facing this housing disaster?
No, immigration could come right down and the housing disaster wouldn't go away. You just have more people owning 2 or 3 flats and leaving them empty. It's not about immigration. The poor immigrants squeeze into housing most efficiently. The problem is that we've changed the rules on tenure in London since the 1980s, so that flats which were designed, maisonettes which were designed for a family with 2 or 3 children, now have a single person in them renting privately. There are more bedrooms in London, just in flats and houses, than there are people. You know, if nobody wanted to sleep in the same bed as anybody else in London, everybody could still have a room. In the middle of London, in Kensington and Chelsea, despite the immigration, the number of people has gone down. But at the same time, they've built more property and they've built subterranean basements in Kensington and Chelsea. This is not about demography. It's not about supply and demand. It's about housing tenure, housing rights, making a profit, housing laws. At the moment, London is like California was in the 1960s. Young, highly skilled people are arriving that we didn't pay to educate, somebody else did. They're coming here, they're very willing to work, and they will squeeze into property, paying almost all their income in rent for the privilege. We should be building more housing, particularly in London, because of this. It's a great asset. What you do not want to be doing is living in a city which has more people leaving than coming in. That's what happened in Glasgow and in Liverpool in the last 40 years.
So it's about power, ultimately. I know that there were maps after the Panama Paper revelations of the ownership of lots of properties in central London. Absentee landlords. George Galloway was the only candidate who said that if properties were empty for a number of years, they would be, I think 6 months, was it, or
6
a year,
months.
they would be immediately taken over by the local council or perhaps regional government.
It's not just George Galloway. That was law before 2010. New Labour, despite their many failings, actually put into law that if you leave a property abandoned for 6 months, the local authority can then begin proceedings to take it over. One of the very first things the coalition government did in 2010, within months of coming into power, was change that 6 months to 2 years. So landlords would get enough warning and could get somebody in. But we've had this as a law. It is easy to change the deadline back to 6 months and to begin to do something about it. We should also be charging enormous council tax on flats which have been bought to be left empty. I'm not against somebody being allowed, if they want to buy a flat and leave it empty, letting them do it. But they need to pay a price for the privilege of using land in London that people could be sleeping in. Already in Camden, they pay twice the average council tax. All these things can be done. You can have a register of landlords and ensure that landlords are actually decent and behaving decently. You can inspect property, and then you can put an order on landlords to improve it for all the properties that are badly looked after in London. There's an enormous amount the mayor can do. He can look at letting agencies' fees. In Scotland, they've got rid of the exorbitant letting agencies' fees. There is a lot he can do. There is even more he can ask central government to do, and every day he can point to them, and he can explain that the reason we have a housing crisis in London is what's happened in the Houses of Parliament. It is not immigration. It is not the Green Belt. It is because there are a group of people who really like it when they can charge you very high rents and when they can sell their property for a very, very high profit.
Can I just get on to one point about the future, as it were? The housing bill obviously is about trying to, I suppose, privatise more land. Sadiq Khan expressing his belief that there should be more private property given to people on less income. Yeah. Is it all about the need to buy that will solve our housing crisis?
In almost all affluent countries of the world, a large number of people don't buy at any one time. It's normal for half the population not to buy and probably about half the population to buy. If you know you're going to be in the same place for about 20 years and you like doing DIY, it makes sense to buy. You shouldn't have a market where just by buying you become rich. What is normal is to have a stable market. What London lacks and the UK lacks is secure tenancy for people renting. And this creates enormous precarity, enormous anxiety and stress. You can be kicked out legally with just 2 months' notice from wherever you are. If you have children and they have friends and they go to school, but the market's on the rise and the landlord can make more money from the flat, you'll be kicked out. And that can happen to you again and again and again. And your children are moved again and again and again and have to make new friends. This is inhuman. It is completely wrong. It is not normal. And it's that wave of anger which made Sadiq Khan such a sure bet for the Mayor of London. And now he has to do something about it. He cannot simply announce meetings or say he's not sure about Help to Buy. He's got to show that the people who trusted him with their vote are going to get something back in return.
Professor Danny Dorling, thank you.
Thank you.